A very warm welcome to this workshop, Being with Neighbours Internationally. One moment. Always good to have a more joyful music, but not perhaps at that moment. We began with that very joyful music from the Sisters of the Church in Melanesia to begin our workshop this afternoon, which is called Being with Neighbours Internationally. And it's just an absolute joy to welcome each one of you, but particularly to welcome our friends and colleagues from overseas. We have friends from the States, and we hope to have our colleague from St. Mary's, Johannesburg, the cathedral there, Dean Zalani, to be with us as well before the end of the session. This has been an extraordinary year. In some senses, we've felt more isolated than ever in this pandemic. But in other ways, it has proven just how interconnected we all are, just how dependent upon one another we all are. All 7 billion of us on this planet are actually more vulnerable to each other's behaviours than perhaps we first thought. And in the church, we have a huge opportunity to nurture relationships, nurture this sense of being with one another, not for any other reason than to delight in one another's company and to delight in nurturing friendships and cherishing God's given creation. So many groups and parishes with overseas links have been, in a way, forced to rethink how to keep relationships alive during the pandemic. And the purpose and goal of this time together, we have an hour. Here's the Dean, how wonderful. We have an hour together is to share stories and to inspire one another in our international partnerships. It hasn't been easy, and of course access to the internet is only available to some people, so there are some constraints. But there have been some exemplary and fruitful ways of engaging, which we're going to hear about today. And whilst the pressures on ministry are immense, we do hope that this session might encourage you to nurture international partnerships in your own churches wherever possible. A lovely distraction from leaking roofs and changing wedding legislation, because it's fun. Above all, it is fun to nurture these relationships. You will have the opportunity, those of you who've gathered, to share your own stories and ask your own questions to these fine panelists. If you could remain on mute until you're invited to unmute and ask your question, that would really help our recording and help the hearing for everybody. We're going to end our workshop today with a musical reflection and a final short prayer. But I'll introduce people one at a time, but we're going to begin with some dear friends of mine, Reverend Graham Buckle, who was my training incumbent down at St. Stephen's, Westminster. And it's an absolute joy to have him on this workshop. He also heads up, I believe, the New York link parishes in London, the London New York link parishes. And so also we have a dear friend, John Bedingfield, from the Church of the Holy Trinity in New York, which I've had the great delight of visiting and witnessing the partnership thrive over my 4 years at St. Stephen's. So over to Graham now and John to tell their story. Thank you.
Well, what we thought we'd do is just yesterday we had a meeting, a rather extraordinary meeting, just to kind of get together and see what we were going to talk about, didn't we, John? And my dogs were attacking some geese at the time. I thought I'd get that out in the open just in case you mention it, and I burst into laughter. It's a true story. So our preparation was a bit punctuated with goose feathers, but we thought that we would just have a little chat, and then we got just a couple of pictures to show you. I hope that's all right, everyone. John, we kind of fell into each other's arms. I mean, kind of by accident, really, didn't we? I mean, the parish relationship came, I think, probably a bit by chance.
Well, you'll see a name and a person on here, John Owsley. That's Father Doug Owsley, and Doug is the matchmaker on the New York side of the Link partnership. And so I'm at the Church of the Holy Trinity. We're way up on the Upper East Side in the neighborhood called Yorkville. We're not the rich, famous Trinity Wall Street. And so we're the poor third cousin uptown. But I had been here for about a year, and Doug Owsley asked if we might be interested in a Link parish. And I thought, well, sure, why not? And he mentioned, this Graham Buckle, and we immediately wondered if it was Buckle or Boucle, like the Keeping Up Appearances show. And I couldn't find much on the internet, and what I did, Graham was in a Speedo, and so I just didn't know really what to make of it. And before long, Graham and his wife Victoria and their son visited. And I think within 10 minutes of meeting, it was like we'd always known each other. And the more we've gotten to know our churches, we have very similar stories. They were both kind of built by these strong-willed, wealthy women with a heart for the community and for social justice. And on it goes with strange similarities that really have seemed of the Holy Spirit. And so we did some visiting back and forth, some of this or that. But for us, especially, what really deepened the relationship was we had a parishioner and her husband who were in London, and she fell and broke her pelvis. And here's this American with a serious injury. She's in a hospital, and I emailed Kath and Graham, and they regularly visited her, were the church for her. And had there been any question beforehand, that really underscored the importance of knowing people around the world, being in relationship, being in community. And so we've had people go back and forth. Graham, you want to say more?
I can remember that very, very vividly. You said you rang up and said you got this person who's kind of, had this terrible accident, and they're at place called St. Thomas's. I said, well, that's our local hospital. I mean, I think that cemented, you know, because I think sometimes when you think of a relationship, you just immediately think of, well, this is a bit of a jolly for the clergy. And that hasn't been the case for us at all. I mean, although we have had jollies, I have to say, you know, and we've both preached at our respective churches, but we've done more than that. And I think one of the things that we've tried to do constantly is to think out. I mean, I hope you agree, John, with think outside the box of a relationship. It's not just about prayer, although you know, I think that has been absolutely terrific. But we've tried to do other things, you know, joint services. We also run this thing in our church called Slow Art. A friend of mine is one of the curators at the National Gallery, and so we look at one picture for, you know, rather than dashing into a gallery and saying we've got to get it all done, you know, we've got to see everything. Actually, we just look at one picture and we look at that intently, and we thought, well, this would work really well on this thing called Zoom. In fact, I believe we did it before Zoom even was invented. Actually, I think we did it on
on Facebook Live or something ridiculous and hard.
Yeah, and it was really kind of archaic, but it was I mean, our conversation wasn't, but the actual technology was, and that was so moving. But would you know what, John? I don't know whether you remember. The one thing I remember about that was our communities waiting in the wings, and suddenly we came up on the screen, and the first thing we did, we all just cheered. Do you remember? Just to see each other. I should never. It was just so moving.
Part of this, we had gotten to know each other because really for 5 years now, every Lent, we've done a joint Lenten devotional, inviting about half, 20-some people from each parish and community, really to write entries, whether it's commenting on Psalms or 1 year on art and several years on scripture. And we do a little bio of the people, and then each day, as we read that, we pray. But then it's so nice to actually meet the person and think, oh, I read your devotion 2 years ago, and we've had people feel, real connections with folks whose words they've read. From the New York end, we've had a handful of people whose work has taken them in and out of London, and with apologies to St. Martin in the Fields, they felt like St. Stephen's is their parish. And they're like, oh yeah, there's this other place, where the bishop is, and this place near the Trafalgar Square, but St. Stephen's is our church. And that's really lovely. We've talked about some mission opportunities and hope to do that in the future, a little more in terms of some joint fundraising.
Yes, we hope to do that with we got a link also. We have got a link with Nehemiah, and we thought we might get a triangle thing going on. That'd be really, really fruitful. I mean, the other thing is that we have tried some other services, John, and I have to say, when the pandemic started, and it was really, really moving when you first joined us and members of your. Honestly, I was really moved to tears just to have knowing that you were there and you were in, we were together in prayer, that we were doing this together, and it was so powerful. That was so powerful, and it wasn't just you. It wasn't just us and the stuff that we. Not just the stuff that we were doing, but it was about our communities who were really, I think, gained so much. And members of our respective communities did join in not morning prayer, but evening prayer for us, afternoon prayer for you. And that was, I don't know about you, John, I was really, I gained so much from that, and so much strength during this difficult time.
Well, absolutely. And I don't, it's not all about the clergy, and yet, there's so many times when thinking about the work in London, thinking about the pace of an English vicar, gives me encouragement for my ministry and vocation here. Especially in the Diocese of New York, it's sometimes tricky to be friendly with other colleagues. They're just layers of competition and complexity, and again, it's just great fun to be able to send an email or with divine intervention, intervene in a probable death of an innocent goose in Westminster yesterday. But who knows what else? But I know our parish has really enjoyed getting to know folks over there, getting to know the story. I've often thought that the churches in London are about 20 years ahead of New York City, because you sort of understand you're in a post-Christian world, and what can we do with that? And we're just catching on to that. But we learn so much from other churches and from other people. So.
Well, I certainly have to say I've learned a great deal from you, and some of the prayers that you've used during the pandemic, we've kind of incorporated too. We share each other's websites, and one of the things that John, I don't know if you remember, John, you said, well, we did a few things together. We did I think a carol service together, but you said about this thing called Blue Christmas. I've never heard of Blue Christmas in my life, but you said it's something that you do. And we had this joint service, and it was I have to say, it was so moving about how, for some, Christmas is a bit of a miserable time. And we acknowledge that through the liturgy. And you kindly moved it to a time which kind of, that suited you and us. That was, I have to say, we were asked to do that again this Christmas, because our crowd got a great deal about it from it. The other thing, John, do you know the one thing, and I forgot to put the picture on actually, was we do this Burns night, and we decided to do that with our friends from the Church of the Holy Trinity. It was the most bizarre Zoom event I've been to in the whole of the lockdown. To see my congregation and members of your congregation doing Scottish dancing on Zoom was bloody amazing. Really, it was kind of crackers, wasn't it?
It was, and I think the canned haggis that I found in Manhattan really sealed our end of it. But yes, it was yet another thing that.
It was such a shame I haven't got this picture. I don't know whether I can find it, but I've got John in a tartan dod collar. But shall I just share the screen and just show you some? I don't know whether how are we doing for time, Kath? Is it time for us to? How much?
About 2 or 3 minutes. Thanks.
Right, lovely. Well, this is I've just put some on, John, and this is in John's rectory. This is and Doug, who my counterpart in New York, in the rectory. We both share yoga being done in church actually, and I did a bit of yoga online, John. I joined you for a couple of sessions. It was a bit late at night, but so we both communities do. Of course, the great thing, you can go with cheery colleagues and meet up in New York too. This is my neighbor, and we're having a swell of a time down there. Look, of course, our families meet each other, and not just my immediate family, but other families within the church congregation. And I know that there's lots of people who've been over to New York, and people from the Church of the Holy Trinity been to our community too. So it's a bit blurred, that one. I was a bit emotional. It was the 8 o'clock.
That was Graham's first visit here, when he ended the perfectly nice worship service by saying, "Oh, and I must have a selfie." And there were several people in our church that were kind of aghast, but we got with the program very quickly.
I love this one with the person right behind my head who then when she left said, "God save the Queen." Of course, this is the fraternity of the fraternity in New York. And I've just put this in really because this shows a little bit, apart from John and his tartan, of some of the things that we've been engaged in together as a joint. And I can say, John, in all honesty and hand on heart, my relationship with yourself and your church community has utterly enhanced my ministry and enhanced our community here at St. Stephen's.
Ours as well, and we look forward to what we can do in the future as well. People are excited, and eager and grateful. So thank you, Catherine, for the chance to talk about it, and we look forward to learning from others.
Thank you both, Graham and John, for that time of sharing. Really, really lovely to hear those stories again. And now we welcome Dean Zalani Deluati, who's joined us from South Africa, I believe. Very glad, Dean, that you have been able to join us. Dean is the Dean of St. Mary's Cathedral, Johannesburg, and St. Martin in the Fields, and St. Mary's has had a long-standing relationship. And the Dean is going to share a few reflections from that partnership, perhaps with Richard Carter's input as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Greetings to brothers and sisters. It's a great pleasure to join you. I see Richard is here. It's good. You know, it's good to be part of this conversation and to see the partnerships, I think, all aimed at growing God's church and building kingdom in various creative ways. I apologize for joining you late. I think it's just connection problems where I am. Just to share about the partnership, in fact, it began way before my time between the cathedral and St. Martin's in the Field, even before I even dreamt to become a dean. It was back during the time of Desmond Tutu as the Dean of Johannesburg, and then the time of Godfrey Henwood as the Dean of Johannesburg, that the partnership began and was encouraged and was strengthened. But when I began ministry as Dean in 2015, we then resuscitated the partnership, working together with Richard at the time to build back partnerships. And I think it has been an incredible partnership. Over time, I think it has begun quite slow. There has been cross visits between Johannesburg and London. But I think since we worked with Richard and now with Jonathan, we've begun to try and strengthen it quite greatly. And one of the things and the key things for me is that we've been able to even have a cross-choir visit, which was quite a blessing. We've been able to host Jonathan when we hosted the 90th anniversary of the cathedral. But the heartwarming one to me is the one that we've not been able to do because of COVID, where I was going to bring a team of young people, about 8 of them, on a pilgrimage to St. Martin's. And I think one of the purposes of that trip, and in what I believe I'm passionate about, is what I call the ministry of exposure. I believe it is dangerous to grow up in one environment, work in one environment, and that's all you know. And when you take leadership with only that, it becomes a bit challenging. And ministry of exposure for me is about cross-cultural ministries, is about international ministries. It is about learning how we each are doing in terms of building kingdom. And there's a lot we can draw from one another. There's a lot we can learn from one experiences that can enhance where one is in terms of ministry. And that for me has been powerfully visible, because having visited St. Martin's just before I took over as dean has changed me greatly in the way I came back and I saw ministry, in the way that, you know, it has even influenced the vision of the cathedral in Johannesburg and where we are actually going. So I personally believe if one could invest in young people, cross-cultural ministries in young people, international ministries in young people, whether they become priests or not, at least they will be leaders within the Church of God in one way or the other. But they bring the global perspective. Because once you understand the global perspective, it shapes the local perspective of what ministry is about. Because then it's not just me and I in Johannesburg. I do know that there's a different way to do things in Holy Trinity in the US, to do things in London at St. Martin's in the Field, to do things somewhere in Australia, somewhere, wherever in the world. I know that we have been created by God differently, but our mission is one, and we can learn from one another. And that is my passion. And part of my vision and prayer, I hope in the future, is that we may resuscitate what the cathedral used to have with the cathedral in Nashville, where clergy would be sent for a sabbatical period, particularly those who would have been in ministry for a while, as a point of rejuvenating, as a point of re-energizing them, but as a point of giving them a global perspective and perhaps a new vision in ministry for God. So these partnerships are a must. Encourage them in order to build God's kingdom.
Thank you very much, Dean Zolani. It's lovely to see you, and it was always brilliant
Yes.
when you were here. I loved having you to stay. And one of the things you've touched upon there is the ministry of music, because when our choral scholars went with me to stay with you, you know, we came with our kind of rather stiff but very different kind of performances of English church music. And the first thing you did was get us dancing and singing in a South African way. We went to the cathedral, where we were really warmly welcomed there. And of course, we went to Soweto, to Holy Cross Soweto, where we were taught to dance as well as sing. And that was an amazing experience. I always remember the choral scholars have never forgotten that experience, and they've come back with that experience very alive in their hearts. And also, one thing that struck us, and I think we'll hear more about this in Melanesia as well, is the way the church is so alive for young people in South Africa, a generation that in many ways, many of our churches feel we've lost here. You know, the 15 to 30-year-olds who are still so active in your church with so many questions to ask. And they're the group that we're going to perform the pilgrimage. And so it makes it very exciting. And I know the same is true in Melanesia as well.
Yes, indeed.
Incredibly special last year. It was incredibly special last year to have a joint service for Bread for the World on a Wednesday night with members, young people from the cathedral. It's just absolutely extraordinary that we could share in the same liturgy, and that was early on in the pandemic and very memorable. And we hope to do that sort of initiative, again.
Yeah. And that is why we give thanks to God for this, way of doing things, internet and Zoom, because it connects us quite powerfully together. And you would see I'm wearing a braided shirt. And the reason for that is that on the 25th of May, we were celebrating Africa Day. And that is why May in South Africa is Africa Month. So where we give thanks to God for, the blessings in Africa, but for who we are in Africa, for the diversity in the midst of challenges. But God is still good, and we continue to give thanks for God's goodness.
The other thing
in our lives. So you must say then to me, Happy Africa Day.
Happy Africa Day. Another thing our choral scholars have never forgotten is when you took them to your home in Soweto and gave them all lunch, and it was the first time they've had such a massive lunch. Can you tell us about that?
Within the township where I grew up in Soweto, there's something called kota. It sounds like a very funny word, but kota is when you take a loaf of bread, you cut it into 4, it creates 4 times quarters. And then you open one of those breads, then you put what we call chips, which is the fries, and you put French, you put polony, you put eggs, you put what they call acha. Acha is a chili thing made from mango. It's called acha. And you see, and it's very exciting to eat that, but it's very unhealthy, I know, because it has a lot of fat with it. But amazingly, it's quite a powerful meal and a stable meal, especially for people who are poor, that's the easiest meal you can access at a very cheap price. So it is a delicacy, when you come to the township and actually enjoy that. And I remember some of them were looking at this quarter and they were just nice to me. I'm not sure whether they wanted to eat it, but at least we had made sure there was some green salads at the side to actually take out of them. It's part of that cross-cultural experience, international relations where we expose one another. It was a very amazing experience, though.
Really wonderful. Thank you, Dean. It's really special that you're with us, and I can see already you've stimulated some conversation in the chat. So we'll come back to questions of how we deepen a ministry of exposure, perhaps after we've heard from all our contributors. But thank you, Richard, as well for stepping in.
Yeah.
Many thanks. We now move on to our partnership with Epping. Epping Team Ministry has a wonderfully rich partnership with Heavenly Rest Church in New York, with St. Mary's Napa in California, and with St. Luke's in Rio in Brazil. And I believe we now have Luis, I hope, from Brazil to welcome as well. But I'm going to hand over to Lee and Olivia to introduce their guests. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I am a vicar in the Epping team, and alongside my fabulous colleague Lee, I have been delighted to be part of an international community, as Kath said, with brothers and sisters in New York, in Napa, in Jordan, Jerusalem, and in Brazil. Personally, I was first introduced to the Worldwide Anglican Communion in 2008 when I was a steward for the Lambeth Conference. That is where I first met brothers and sisters from various communities in Melanesia, and where I was fortunate enough to make friends with people around the world, many of whom became ordained, and some of whom were even happy to have me with them on placement. And these placements have been have had a huge impact on my faith. I have learned so much from them. And I think the Anglican Communion, working together in partnership, is such a massive blessing for each and every one of us. I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Lee, who's going to talk about our particular partnership, how it happened, why it happened, and the movement from being a leadership only group to broadening it out to our congregations. Over to you, Lee.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be here, and I'd just say a quick hello to Brian McDonald-Milne, who I was on placement in his church when I was a student, and I've not seen you for many years. It's good to see you, Brian. So yes, I've been working with in the diocese on global partnerships, and always trying to work out how we involve lay people rather than just clergy going backwards and forwards. But at the conversation we're now going to sort of share with you, this didn't exist 12 months ago. Unlike the other examples, this partnership did not happen and is a direct result of Zoom, but also the direct result of a friendship I've been privileged to develop with Elizabeth Bow from the Episcopal Church. We've met at Partnership and World Mission gatherings, and the Episcopal Church gathered clergy from the global north and from Africa on Zoom as a way to have fellowship. And it was during one of those that Robin Denny from Napa was there. And effectively, we thought, actually, this might be a way to get lay Christians to engage and see what happens. It was a time when, obviously, as we just know, because the anniversary's just passed, George Floyd had been killed, and we were beginning to ask all sorts of questions about racial justice as well as climate justice. And so initially, it was a transatlantic Bible study between Church of Heavenly Rest in New York and St. Mary's Napa with Elizabeth and Robin, who with Olivia, we just thought, you know what, let's just give it a go. We've got no idea if there's any legs in this, but let's try it. And so with the respective leadership teams, we started by offering a monthly Bible study around justice and different angles on that question, led by each church in turn, with the same number of representatives from each of our church communities. And on the back of that, we then said, well, that was rather fun. Why don't we try and covenant together for a year? And Robin was good friends with Wadie, who's a priest in the Church of Jerusalem, Jordan, he was in Jordan at the beginning, is now in Jerusalem, having had one of the maddest kind of end of terms I've ever heard of, where having celebrated Easter in Jordan, he then had to cross the border by midday to get to his next post. And I know Robin may say a bit more about that when she speaks. And then he brought in with him a group of Christians in their 20s, 30s from across the Diocese of Jerusalem and Middle East. And the next phase was to offer a weekly Lent service, each church taking it in turns to lead, with a representative from one of the other churches preaching. And that was a real gift to our people. We also did a kind of a live webinar to introduce it. We got a good number of people from what was then 4 different communities. And then we literally, as of last Wednesday, just concluded a 5-week climate justice, was it 6 weeks? I forget, 6 weeks climate justice Bible study using material from USPG. And that was when we then included representatives from the Episcopal Church in Brazil, thanks to Olivia's friendship with Louise. So we're a partnership that's busy trying to work out what the next step is, which has already seen many blessings, and where all of it, there is not one person who has shaken hands with every other person on the leadership group, let alone anywhere else. That's quite exciting, but it's also been one of the real blessings that's come out of the pandemic. So that's the journey so far. We're meeting next month to work out the next stage and what that will look like. But it's already been a huge gift to our clergy and our lay people alike. So that's the kind of journey so far. I'm going to bounce back to Olivia to see what happens next, really.
I think we're going to bounce the way over to Napa, I think, now, and hand over to Robin.
Thanks. It's just been such a joy to get to know the folks through this partnership, and so I have a lot of experience with the Anglican Communion. I was a missionary in Liberia and South Sudan, and when I was in South Sudan, Elizabeth was in Tanzania, so we were missionaries together in East Africa and got to know each other then. But my congregation, where I'm fairly new, doesn't have a lot of experience in global mission, and they have really enjoyed this experience, which didn't start out with a covenanting or a kind of a big statement of relationship, but really just, well, let's try this, and do you want to meet some folks from other parts of the world? And I had a waiting list that was just as long as the number of people who were able to be part of the first Bible study. So there was clearly just a lot of interest, and we pray for the churches by name each Sunday, and there's just been this real groundswell of interest and an idea, I think, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, when we all felt so isolated and alone, to have access to friends around the world that just, we were all struggling, but we're all part of this human family that is struggling with this virus and with the implications. But also that there was hope in the fact that we could connect with each other in new ways that weren't possible before, and that, as we said, there are some gifts in this time. That this was the clear gift that we always mention, is the chance to get to know and make friends in other parts of the world in a real level way, because we're all in these little boxes on the screen interacting with each other. Wadia can't be with us today, unfortunately, from Jerusalem, but sends his greetings. He and I went to seminary together, and it was just been amazing to add when they were able to join our partnership. And Wadia just began. So it was 8 days before the conflict started in Jerusalem that he moved there. So very recently, it was the Orthodox Easter. And so then he jumped ahead in the Easter calendar. He missed almost the entire Easter season, because in Jerusalem, then they use the same calendar we do. So it was almost Ascension Day when he just crossing the border. But we've been able to, talk with him, and as we've been watching the news and seeing what's happening, also, praying for friends by name. And they just had the installation service of their new bishop, and to be able to join that service on Zoom is, of course, something that we wouldn't have done if we hadn't made friends with them already. And just to be inspired by, in the midst of a conflict, people gathering to worship God and to celebrate new ministry and be dedicated to the work of God, moving forward. was just really inspiring to us, and an encouragement to continue in each place where we are with the work that we're called to do. So that's all, unless you have any questions later from me.
Thank you so much, Robin. And I think now we're going to head all the way over to Brazil, Luis.
Hello, good morning. So our experience, first of all, it's always fascinating to see so many nice faces there, and some faces I know for a long time, which kind of prove that the world and the Anglican Communion are rather small, because I've seen in person some of the people who are there. So my experience with partnerships has actually started a long time ago when our diocese had a partnership with the Diocese of Atlanta in the United States. This one no longer exists, but I actually spent some time there as a seminarian. And later, my current parish started a companionship with a parish in the suburbs of Atlanta. And we've been able to develop a rather conventional way of doing partnerships, which is people travel to places and come back. I started as rector there, but they've had this, I started as rector a few months ago, but I've been priest in charge prior to that. It's a very fruitful relationship. It's been for a few years, but this whole idea that Olivia provided as an invitation was actually very interesting, because we've been trying to widen this kind of conversation. And despite all the problems the pandemic has brought us, it also taught us. I have 95-year-old parishioners who are able to log on Zoom right now because of the pandemic. And so for the first time, I was able to develop a conversation globally. And thank you, Advent team and Heavenly Rest and all the people, and St. Mary's Napa, and all the people who have been doing this conversation online, so I could invite some parishioners to join the whole course on environmental justice. Well, my perspective is a bit different, because even if I am a bilingual person, not everybody in my congregation is. So it's a completely different scenario from some of the experiences that have been shared. And I think we need to keep in mind that in order to be truly cross-cultural and truly encompassing of the Anglican Communion, we need to understand that some parts of the communion do not speak English as their primary language. So how did we try to develop this here? We had those Bible studies together, and in our location, it was at 1 p.m. We would have at 7 p.m. at night a recap in Portuguese. So we would try to translate a little bit of what was discussed, and come up with new, arguments and discussions that some of us would bring back to the conversations. One thing that has been very fruitful was that despite it being at 1 p.m., which was a very difficult time for a lot of people, including some wonderful English speakers that are part of my congregation, I had a few people who clearly knew English as a second language. One of them is here, Giselle is here. And with all their difficulties in terms of expressing what they believed or what they saw, the group as a whole was very inclusive in that regard. So that was a very good experience. Now that we have learned, we're slowly going back to our church buildings. And now that we have learned how to be in those kind of, close relationships without having to travel all the time, I'm looking forward to keeping this, to continue with this relationship with Christians around the world, and also to invite some of the parishioners to join them. And I totally believe, at least our vestry has voted, our PCC has voted, that Christian education and weekly activities will remain in a hybrid model for the near future. So even if we resume totally in-person services, those kind of activities will continue to be for, you know, an indefinite amount of time hybrid. So some people will be at the church, but some people will log from home. And we want to explore those opportunities to get to talk and to know and to meet new people from the Anglican Communion and from other Christian churches around the world, and to share a little bit of our experience. It was very fruitful. The first Bible study was very important. We live in a very complicated political situation in Brazil with the rise of neo-fascism and years and years and years of environmental policies being, you know, revoked. So the church, for me to get our church to talk about it and to understand that we need to mobilize in a way that is a bit more than just not using plastic cups, that we need to force the government and to advocate for, you know, laws that laws that bring back the policies that we had in the past regarding the environment, that we need to take this issue very seriously, and as a witness of our Christian faith is very important. So thank you very much for that, and I'm open to any questions you might have. Thank you.
Kath, do you want to take, we'll do questions at the end, Kath, did you say?
You guys to do questions at the end. There's just so much that you've brought up there. Thank you ever so much. But
handing over to Elizabeth now from me.
Yes, please.
Great. Thank you. It's lovely to be with you all. I echo Louise and Robin's comments about the Anglican Communion being a small place. My younger sister actually spent a year working with Louise in Rio de Janeiro through our young adult missionary program. And as Robin said, we met when I was training to be a missionary. She had just come back from Liberia and was heading to South Sudan. And it's really lovely to be with the Hard Edge Network and with St. Martin's. Whenever I'm in London, I always make a point to go to St. Martin's. And it's just really fun how we're all connected in ways that we discover. And I think that for us at Heavenly Rest, I would say as a layperson, I'm a vestry member at Heavenly Rest. I think that's what we've discovered too, that we're all far more connected than I think any of us realized going into these conversations. And I think as we certainly at Heavenly Rest are, I think, more developing newer ways of connecting globally, and being part of this group has really given us a great deal to think about. It's also helped, I think, during this time of pandemic to really personalize the stories that we see on the news or read in the newspaper. And from what I've heard from fellow parishioners, it's changed the way that they pray, not just for the people who've been part of the relationship, but just in general, and to really take more time with it and to think differently. And as someone whose day job is actually global mission, I work on presiding Bishop Curry's staff and handle our missionary sending programs. It's such a gift to actually be with my church family in these global connections too, that are, you know, related to my work, but are so transcendent. And so one of the gifts that we actually, I think was really powerful for us as Heavenly Rest was during our Lenten service. This was before Louise and the team at St. Luke's had joined us. We had the Arabic speaking partners of our group doing their service, which was almost entirely in Arabic, which was gorgeous. And Wadia is a computer whiz, and he put subtitles for the rest of us, because otherwise I don't think any of us would have been able to understand. But what we decided to do was to sort of do an inventory of language skills ourselves amongst the Heavenly Rest team. And so we found that we could do almost every other line in the Lord's Prayer in our service that Olivia preached at in a different language that was just represented in our community, which a lot of us didn't know. So it was really, and then we got to hear stories from each other about, well, how do you, like, we knew one person had been born in Germany, so that was, you know, the easiest way to figure that out. But for everyone else, well, how did you learn Russian? How did you learn, you know, French? And so is not only a way for us to get to know the broader church, like to really have a deeper understanding of what it means to be part of the global body of Christ, but it also has really helped us connect more deeply with each other as we've gotten to know each other and spend more time together that way. And so moving forward, you know, people keep asking, well, when are we doing our next thing as a group? And so, well, we're working on it, but there's a lot of energy there to keep it going. And to, as Louise said, we're looking at hybrid, like we are able to gather in person in smaller numbers, certainly in New York now, but as I'm sure many of you have experienced, there are people who have just joined us online because, you know, they came across something on Facebook or who knows what. And so we're really looking at what does it mean to be an incarnational presence online as well as in person. And this group is one of the ways that we can do that, that will continue to deepen our faith, both as individuals and as a parish. And so it's just a blessing to be with this group and to share all of this with you all.
I'll just kind of jump in briefly before I hand over to Lee to talk about where we may be going in the future. I just want to reiterate what my brothers and sisters have said on this call. This meeting, this partnership has been one of the great joys and blessings that we have discovered through the awfulness of the COVID lockdown pandemic. It has just been an utter joy to pray with people across the world, to celebrate the differences, to ask questions, to just learn so much from one another, and to have our faith renewed through these new friendships. And I know our congregations who have joined in recently with our studies have felt the same. They are desperate to hear more about our partnership communities, desperate to ask questions. And in particular, in relation to the last course, I think it's been very helpful to see how decisions that we make in our country have already and are impacting other countries in relation to climate change. And I think that's been a really good lesson that we really need to hear and to bear witness to. So I'm just going to stop there because I'm conscious of the time and hand over to Lee.
Great. I didn't realise I was going to do this bit, but anyway, that's good. Yeah, very briefly, my favourite Bible text, Abraham set out by faith, not knowing where he was going, Hebrews chapter 11. I think that's where we are. I think we've enjoyed the journey so far. And I think we've got a meeting planned next month to kind of ask what's God saying next. And I think I would literally just want to say to everybody on this call, you know, it's been a hugely wonderful journey. How long it will go on for, where it will go next, who else might join us. We started as transatlantic. We now covered a couple more oceans and a couple more continents. We don't know. And I think that's the excitement. And I don't feel it's my place to say any more than that, because that's for that group to sit and discern in the fullness of time. But it's already been good, and I'm sure it will continue to be so. So thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to share something of a journey over the pandemic. And one day maybe we'll even get to see each other face to face and discover if we have legs. And that's also something I'm excited about, but we'll find out. Thanks, Kath.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much indeed. What an exemplary partnership, just so interesting and rich and diverse. So thank you, Olivia, thank you, Lee, and to all those contributors for being here today. We'll come back to you for further questions, but finally we turn now to Katie Drew, who is the head of Indonesian Mission UK, and she's going to share some of the rich partnerships that we have developed in the last year with Melanesia in the South Pacific.
Thank you, Catherine, and hello everybody. It's been a joy to be with you this afternoon. I've learned so much from all of your journeys, and what a blessing the Anglican Communion is. And as so many people have said, you know, as a family with so many different voices to listen to and stories to be told, it's been an absolute joy. The Indonesian Mission is an Anglican mission agency, and we support the Anglican Church of Melanesia in the South Pacific from the UK. And we've always been about prayer, about people, facilitating relationships, training, mission, parish links and placements, and about the giving of time and, of course, donations and finance. Now, this relationship for a long time has always been mutually beneficial, whether that's through the prayer, the people, or the giving. And we've already talked about the benefits of cross-cultural learning and the ministry of exposure, which is a lovely expression which has come out today. So normally, how would we do this? Well, we would have visits from Melanesians to the UK. And recently they've almost turned into sort of mini missions and large missions. There was a mission of brothers to the Lambeth Conference. We've toured the UK, visiting parishes and schools. We arranged trips for people from the UK to actually go out to Melanesia as well as supporters, as volunteers, trainers, clergies and orderlands. But of course, COVID stopped all of that. And there was a bit of a panic, you know, how are we going to maintain these core mission and these relationships? How are we going to keep things going? And how are we going to keep supporters informed of what's going on out there? So rather begrudgingly, we first of all moved our AGM and festival day online. And we thought, oh gosh, who's going to turn up? Is anybody going to want to? Well, it was an amazing response we had. We actually had over 80 people turn up, which is quite a big number for us. And we realized that because we were online, we could have people from the Solomon Islands joining us, from Fiji and from Australia. And also we had a number of our supporters that maybe hadn't been able to get to AGMs and festival days in recent years, who actually could come along and attend from the comfort of their own homes. So we had a wonderful evening. We had an act of worship. We had a pre-recorded hymn. We had our AGM business, and then we had our guest speakers. And we had our speakers live there from the Solomon Islands, telling us exactly what was going on that day. So the feedback from this was really, really encouraging. So we realized this is something that we can start doing. So we started organizing more and more online events like this. Some of them would be in the morning, some of them would be in the evenings. And we called them coffee mornings and cocoa nights, because when it's morning for us in the UK, it's evening for them in Melanesia and vice versa. So we've had events with the Anglican religious orders out there. And as Richard was saying, how nice it is to hear about the ministry of younger people within the Anglican Communion, listening to them and about them going out on mission. And we held a recent event with a church that had never been exposed to Melanesia before, a church in this country. And I think maybe the people from the congregation that came along to that event maybe thought they'd seen everything of what was going on in the Anglican Communion. And then to see their faces when they heard this is the Melanesian brothers singing and talking, they were like, wow, this is something new from the Anglican Communion. And how great that is to think that we can still be inspired by other people. So we've had events with the Anglican religious orders. We've had events with other guest speakers from Melanesia. And the most moving thing for us is because there's not been a lot of cases of COVID in Melanesia. It's affected them other ways in the economy, but they've really been concerned about us in the UK. And to have them share with us and listen to our concerns and pray for us in the UK has been incredibly moving, to know that they're concerned about what's happening here. So that's been lovely. So we normally start with short act of worship. We then give an opportunity to hear from our friends, brothers and sisters in Melanesia. Then there's a time of questions both ways, and then we close in prayer. And these normally last about an hour in length. Now, there are some challenges to holding these events, and we very much had to consider the IT and the data costs for our friends in Melanesia. And that's something as a charity we're going to be supporting to make sure, you know, they're not out of pocket for being part of this relationship in this way. The connections aren't always great. And, you know, there's always a lot of prayer beforehand. Have they managed to connect? Is it all working? Is it raining in Honiara? Are we going to hear them? So we always have some backup plans in place. So we do pre-record some of the sections of it. We try to have copies of any presentations that they're making. And we've also going to start using more use of subtitles and spotlighting speakers, because, you know, I'm very much aware of possibly people joining us that are hard of hearing. We've really got to look at the accessibility of all of this. And of course, as our other speakers have said, you know, thinking about languages in the future as well. But the benefits have been amazing. You know, to start a Saturday morning with hearing from the Melanesian sisters singing to us and sharing in prayer just carries me through the whole weekend, and it has been absolutely amazing. So even coming out of lockdown, we want to do more of these. It's going to be a huge capacity thing, because as the organisers of this know, it's not a one man or one woman job. It takes a lot of preparation. You need people doing things here, there and everywhere. But we want to do more of them. It's better for the environment. We're not travelling so much. You know, not all of our supporters, not of all of our people in our parishes are going to ever afford or be able to travel to Melanesia. So we can bring Melanesia into their homes and into their parishes. And, you know, we don't need to wait for these visits or these missions every 18 months. We can have more contact with our brothers and sisters in Melanesia. So it's helping build relationships. It's also helped a lot of people in this country that have felt isolated during the pandemic. So that's been another really good thing as well. And like the other speakers have spoken about, you know, the opportunities are endless. We're thinking about clergy cell groups. We want to do Bible studies. We're particularly concerned with the environment and want to bring some more environmental groups together. We think that, you know, parishes could share a lot together on what they're learning about the changes in their local environment and how they can campaign with that. Youth ministry and also online training. You know, if we have a training request, we don't necessarily need to send somebody out there. We can do the training, and that goes both ways as well. So we're really excited. Yes, it has been an absolutely horrible year. Nobody would have wanted this. It's forced us to do some things, but I think this is, as some of people have said, a benefit to have come out of this, that we found new ways of being family and new ways of staying connected together. So thank you for having me to talk to you today.
Tremendous. Thank you ever so much, Katie. I've been a bit of part of that story, and it's been hugely enriching and very, very special to keep those relationships going. So thank you for articulating that so beautifully. Now it's time for some questions. I'd like to kick off by asking, you know, so we have perhaps people here who would love to embark on some of these relationships, but haven't got the friends from theological college, or, you know, haven't got the initial relationships on the ground to enable this to happen. You know, how can people go about to branch out and meet people overseas if you haven't got those initial connections? Perhaps John or Graham might like to give their input, or anybody unmute themselves and contribute.
Perhaps in the first instance, I mean, it all depends where you feel God is calling your parish and yourself to link up to. I mean, if it was, for example, in New York, I mean, New York became a live issue because of some of the issues that were going on at the Lambeth conference many years ago, and we felt that, you know, London needed to branch out to our friends in the Episcopal Church in America. But there should be, each diocese has a link officer for a particular missional partnerships, and I would say that would be the first instance. So if it was like New York, you would come to me, and if you were in New York, you would go to Doug, who's there. Or, I mean, there are organisations where you can reach out to where you will be given help. That said, I think in the first instance, it's about praying where you feel that God is, you know, kind of leading your parish to.
I was just going to throw in, I think it is difficult and challenging. And often I have an idea of where I think God should call our church to be in partnership, and no one's on the other end. Churches in Puerto Rico, churches in much of Central America don't have websites, don't have the technology. And so even though we have Spanish speakers here, it's really impossible to be in conversation with actual parishes and ministry. So this is a huge challenge for us. And so I think sometimes you do go with the relationships you have, and and you build from there. In my own case, I wrestle with this idea of, well, wouldn't it be great if? And yet those connections don't really exist right now. Maybe they will another day.
Wonderful. And Robin's put some helpful suggestions in the chat too. Thank you, Robin. That's wonderful. So I would like to, if we could turn back to the Dean to answer the question about some insights about the Ministry of Exposure, Youth and Ecological Justice. How can we build on these, Dean? Asked Mother Julie. Julie, did you want to ask anything more at this point? Are you still with us?
Yes, I am. I'm here actually, Kat.
Please do ask away.
Yeah. Actually, I come from a very rural benefice. I have three parishes, parishes, about 2 miles apart in the Lambourne Valley. And actually, just in response to that last question before, is that actually I belong to actually a sodality of priests. It's a sodality of Mary, and we've become, through the pandemic, international in membership. And actually, I know it's not for everybody, but it is amazing how these things have grown and the way in which we would be able to pair up. And this has really inspired me, because we've got very good praying relationships, pastoral relationships within the sodality of priests, but actually being able to expand that might be really helpful. Secondly, I'm on the Council for the Partnership in World Mission in Oxford Diocese, and we have links, and as somebody else has said, to try and connect through your diocese. They would, I mean, it's enriching the ministry I have here with my people because of looking outwards. You know, we're very rural, so it's easy to all go like this, but actually we're all, you know, and people are beginning to look out, and that's on our small little level a great joy. Finally, the ecological justice idea came from following the USPG, and I'd love to hear more about how other people who are doing it internationally have found that, because we had an idea of teaming up youth with the Indian guys who are doing Indian schools in the USPG, and you know, we'd love to have got on board a bit. So I'd love to hear more about how our international partners have managed that. I also have a Brazilian daughter-in-law in Recife. So tudo bem.
I could
move to. Yes, go for it, Robin. Thank you.
And say, yeah, that we really enjoyed the USPG curriculum, and not being familiar with it initially from the US side. Lee introduced me to it, and the two of us led that study together. It was really neat because, of course, all the examples come from all over the world. And so we had a group of people from different parts of the world who were reflecting on stories from other parts of the world. And it was really wonderful to, just from our different contexts, be able to share. The other neat thing about our partnership, because it started on Zoom, is that it's not a clergy down relationship. So, you know, the conversations were among everybody who gathered. And so we would introduce the topic, and then Lee and I, as the leaders, would move ourselves out of the breakout room for the discussion so that people felt free to share with one another. And at least from my members, the members of my church that participated, they were so moved to hear stories from, you know, especially from our friends in Brazil about their experience ecologically, and really kind of helped to increase the commitment in our own hearts and in our own places.
Wonderful. Thank you. Dean.
Yes, please. Thank you. I think firstly, if I begin with the first question, is that how do we build this relationship? I think we've done, by this conversation, 3 steps ahead in terms of how do we build this relationship. So we are 3 steps ahead. And I think one other thing, yes, it's true, and I agree with Graham, it has to be driven by mission and purpose. It has to be driven by vocation from God. But practically, on the practical side as well, I believe that we need to become ourselves in these platforms, ambassadors within our spaces. I know some dioceses, like Graham had said, they would have what they call diocesan link officers. but perhaps it's upon me within my own context to look at where are the needs, discern the needs, and where do I think God is calling partnerships. And that is why it is on those bases I talk about ministry of exposure, so that it doesn't just end with my parish being the Cathedral of St. Mary's and St. Martin's, but we say, how about my neighboring parish? How can they benefit from another mission? Because remember, these relationships and partnerships should also be not about one over the other, but about what we learn from one another. They should not be about financial benefit, but about they should more be about mission and experience benefit. So even in my own space, I can look and say, which church do I believe can benefit from a partnership? So I could be some kind of an ambassador as well within my own space. But in terms of ministry of exposure, somebody has asked, how do we go about it? And I think for me, ministry of exposure has three pillars to it, or three objectives. One, it's enrichment. You know, it should be about me when I go to a particular place, exposed to a ministry. It must enrich my ministry or the ministry of the community where I find myself. It should be about formation. Well, for me, that's the second pillar, to help us grow in our relationship with God by being exposed to different forms of spiritualities, different forms of expressions, different forms of worship and liturgy. But the third pillar for me, it should be about development. That's when you bring the formal aspect of it, academic development, you know, cost development. So for me, it should be those particular pillars. And it should be threefold as well. As I said, it should not only be end with clergy. Yes, it should begin with clergy, but it should also move to lay people, you know, so that we don't keep it for ourselves as clergy, but we need to say, how do I open the doors from lay people within my congregation to be exposed with other lay people as well? But more so also it should be on young people. You know, how do we begin to expose our young people? Some places have young people like us here, but some places might not. But in actual fact, how do we link our young people in universities as well? You know, within Southern Africa, we have an Anglican Students Federation, which is a gathering of young people in universities. If they are not in parishes, how can we link universities here and abroad as well? So I think there's opportunities, but it should be mission driven.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for those insights for us to mull over. I'd really love to turn now to Brazil, to Luis, who would like to make some comments.
Yeah, just a quick comment from our experience, because somebody has mentioned if you're looking for a companionship or a relationship with churches abroad, you should contact the national office and all of that. Sometimes it may be very helpful. What I've seen is that the Anglican Communion still operates pretty much by using the diocesan companionship model, which sometimes just doesn't work at all, because you need to have a great effort from both dioceses, and then you have to connect the parishes, and sometimes it's just not a good fit. And that's like the top-down approach that is traditional and is still very useful, but sometimes might be coupled with what we are trying to do right now. Sometimes the connections we have through friendships that we have already acquired might be more useful to develop those kind of links rather than a traditional, the national office of the church, at least that's how it was here, establishes a bilateral committee or asks the Anglican Communion or their diocese are willing to cooperate. And then when one of the bishops is not really willing to do it, it doesn't happen. Even if it's signed, if it's official, if one of them is not really committed to doing that, then the whole thing falls apart. But sometimes what we're trying to do, and COVID has taught us to reinvent ourselves a lot, can be established as a new model, because we're brothers and sisters in Christ. So companionship is not something that we need to follow only according to official provincial guidelines. We can do this as a network And so this is why it's so interesting. The whole idea of heart edge, which I didn't know until Olivia had told me to join this conversation, is a new experiment in terms of building communities throughout the Anglican Communion and other denominations as well, in a new way. Doesn't exclude the traditional model of companion dioceses, but it provides us new opportunities. So in case somebody wants to connect to a Spanish-speaking parish, which was the point that somebody mentioned, I might be able to help. I might know some people from our Latin American and Caribbean conferences. That I used to be a facilitator hired by Trinity Wall Street to do that. So I might know some parish that might be willing to do that, and then it can go outside of the traditional model as well. If the diocese, the local diocese, is not really willing to connect with a diocese in Latin America, so perhaps that's another possibility. Thank you.
Really, really helpful, Luz. It is a whole time of reframing and reimagining how we engage in these partnerships, and you've highlighted that really well. We're going to hand now to Lee Batson just for a comment.
Yeah, just quickly, I think having been involved in trying to get parishes to link with Kenya for a while, it struck me that often when we look at partnership, we almost go into them with the expectation that we go from first date to marriage in the space of 4 hours. And I sort of think that one of the most helpful things for me in terms of our current relationship is the fact that we kind of trialed something, and now we've covenanted together for 12 months, and then we'll see what happens. And I think sometimes when we're trying to encourage people to engage, there's in the background that pressure of, oh, I'm signing up for something, and then it drifts and we feel guilty about the fact it's drifting. We don't quite know how to end it because we think we've committed to life, rather than actually just allowing it to evolve much more naturally. And I think certainly from some experiences which have gone a bit wrong in the past, I feel that where we are now in our partnership just feels like a much more secure pace by pace journey. Where we'll be, we don't know, but if it's, you know, but the courtship phase is fun, and we'll enjoy that for as long as it's meant to last, if I can push the analogy further. That was just the
I've got a question for the Epping Team Ministry, just about what you have learned about doing international Bible study together. You know, do you bring different insights to the reading of Scripture from different parts of the world? And what have you learned from that? How has that enriched your reading of Scripture and opened people out from their contexts?
Olivia's very helpfully just chatted over to me. Thanks, Olivia. I appreciate that. I think it's a really interesting question, because I think the recent Bible study has taught us something around what Father Lewis was saying about language and just taking things a bit slower. And I think it's taught us to kind of slow down and listen more attentively, and gradually become more respectful of the fact that we're often asking people to talk to us in their second or third language. But there's no doubt that just having people, for example, the wildfires in California, having that experience, very lived experience, brought into a reflection upon the environment, has transformed how we then look at some texts. It's kind of hard to say from one level, because we weren't in the group discussions, but we did initially kind of as clergy just kind of go off and talk more, and I think we learned quite a lot about how we were approaching the text, even within the global north context, in quite different places, and some of the assumptions we made. But Robin may wish to comment further on that.
Just to say, I was actually evacuated from my home during one of our Bible study sessions last fall, and so it was like the concept of what these things are doing to the environment, but also just the real lived experience of shared prayer, and just feeling really held by friends around the world when we were going through that. And you know, the same thing with when we were talking with our friends in Brazil on the last Bible study, is during this terrible increase in deaths from COVID as well. So we're hearing about the reality of the situation, but also being heartbroken for and praying with friends around the situation. And then again, you know, Jerusalem in the news now. So it's it makes the world much smaller, and brings, I think, to the forefront some of these deeper issues that we feel compelled to do something about, but also to support each other in prayer.
Wonderful. Thank you ever so much, Robin. Does anybody else have any other comments?
Well, I also think that this shared Bible study gives us a much greater sense of what the church is. I mean, I think so often we can get so wrapped up in our own territories and our own parishes that we forget, you know, the Christian church around the world. And once you start to do Bible study with people from other countries who are in very different circumstances, the texts start to come alive in new ways. They cease to be, you know, trying to prove how much you know yourself, but they become real listening exercises and ways of hearing the stories of the way the scriptures are affecting the lives of other people. It becomes just a far broader and wider sense of what church is. So that in that way, very, very exciting. Whenever we've done this with Melanesia or with South Africa or with whatever part of the world, the scriptures suddenly come alive.
It's a real joy to have Father Brian MacDonald Milne on our call. Brian is a huge inspiration to many of us. He spent 40 years in Melanesia as a priest, and he's just raised his hand to make a point. But Brian, thank you for being with us tonight. You really, this afternoon, you really do you know, embody all that we are speaking about. So you'll have to unmute.
I wanted to add a different dimension, Kath, the ecumenical one, which has not actually been mentioned. I know it's very important to have our links across the Anglican Communion. But my experience, particularly working for the Pacific Conference of Churches, as well as within the Anglican Church of Melanesia, was a very enriching experience in many ways. And I've twice been secretary of the Solomon Islands Christian Association, which brought together the different denominations there. And we discovered great things about each other, particularly as in that country, different churches were situated in different geographical areas and didn't very often meet. And just to take an example from the parishes where I am in Cambridgeshire, we have established a very fruitful relationship with a Roman Catholic parish in France. And that's sort of enriched my ministry and also made me realize in some ways how fortunate we are in this country. We take for granted many things which the French church hasn't got. It's got very few clergy for a start. And so they're involved in mission in a very challenging kind of way. And although they have members of religious orders, of course, the numbers of them are much reduced. So when you compare their situation with the situation in Melanesia, where there are lots of members of religious orders, I think we can share something with our ecumenical partners as well, which amazes them, just as we can learn a lot about their needs and pray for them and work with them. And I'm able to operate in more than one language, I may say, which does help because I do use French. And use that in the New Hebrides or Vanuatu when I was there. So, I mean, these are all things which have enriched my ministry and helped to enliven my ministry and also broaden my vision. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Brian. Our time is drawing to a close and we have a very short 1.5-minute musical reflection now, followed by one slide of a psalm, Psalm 100. And I've taken the liberty of assigning a verse each to one of our contributors. Your name is clearly on the final slide. If you could just unmute yourselves and say the verse, that would be lovely. And then I wonder if Brian might end with a blessing in pidgin for us at the end, and then I will thank our contributors. But I'm hugely grateful to every one of you who has gathered here tonight.
Kath, can I just ask, does everybody know what pidgin is?
You can tell them.
Well, it's a trade language used in the South Pacific, and in some parts of the world you'll get Creole languages based on French, and in other parts of the world you'll get pidgin languages based mostly on English, but other languages as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we now share Psalm 100, a psalm of thanksgiving together.
Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth.
Worship the Lord with gladness. Come into his presence with singing.
Know that the Lord is God. It is he that has made us, and we are his. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture.
Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him. Bless his name.
For the Lord is good. His steadfast love endures forever, and his faithfulness to all generations.
Thanking God for our partnerships together, for the way that we are enriched by one another's friendships and presence. Thanking God so much for our contributors this afternoon. Now we end with the blessing.
God, him, Father, blowing you me, everyone. Bless him, you me. Jesus, Son, blong him, where him save him, you me. Bless him, you me. Spirit, blong God, where him give him power, long you me, everyone. Him stop with him, you me. And God, him and bless him, you me, everyone, today, and long time, him and bye come. Amen.
Once again, Graham Buckle and John Bedingfield and Dean Zolani, thank you for your presence here today. Thank you to Lee Batson and Olivia, to Elizabeth Bow and Robin Denny, and Luis Coelho and others from Brazil. And thank you to Katie Drew for being here this afternoon. And thank you to each one of you who has joined us for this time of reflection and sharing.